It's time for week 12's weekly recap, and I have four main areas for you this week. The first one is in response to your warm up activity, what is assessment? I saw a real trend in this activity, and the first thing that came to mind for most of you when you think of assessment is standardized testing. And for most of you, this was not pleasant. And I hope that since this was the start of the presentation and you had the rest of the presentation to work through, that when you think of assessment now, that you realize it means so much more. It's so valuable for teachers to drive their instruction, but also where you had negative experiences when you think of assessment, we want our students to think of assessment in positive ways and know that it's their teacher's way of knowing what to teach them next. It's their own way of looking at what they're learning and what they need to practice more, and making assessment positive, especially when we look at the ownership they have in portfolio assessment these days and the creativity that can go into those. So hopefully your philosophy on assessment will change after this week's presentation. The second area I want to go over is on the reading diagnosis that you did after completing your first running record, which, by the way, congratulations. You did a great job on what was probably your first running record, and it's not an easy task, as you could probably see. It's one of those tasks that gets easier with practice. You will be able to develop your own shorthand system of what works for you when you're recording, and the coding will get much easier, and you'll become fluent at it as well. Your diagnosis of the student who was reading at a level I was right on target. Everything that I read made a lot of sense with what you analyzed in your MISCU analysis. At this point, we would move our student to a level J for instruction, and we would work on contractions and sight words, which are both sight words that are closely related. In the reading assessment, we saw our and your mixed up, when and then, where and were. And she was able to distinguish between those two words as she self-corrected most of the mistakes. But what we found is that her brain initially responded in a different way. And so we need to give her more practice in seeing the differences in those words more quickly. You also probably noticed that you had to draw a lot of arrows going back because she was rereading the text and self-correcting often, and that really slowed down her fluency. It's a very good thing that a reader goes back and self-corrects and listens to them self-read, but you can see that she could really benefit from more confidence and fluency practice. Those can be both completed through those 1-minute at-home fluency readings we talked about last week, where you send home a passage and they read it for 1 minute Monday, they read it again on Tuesday for 1 minute, and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. And we chart their growth each day. That immediate response to growth builds confidence and will help her become more fluent at recognizing words quickly. So those fluency practices at home might be a good homework option for her. Nice job, though, on diagnosing and coding that running record. Now, we had two questions that came up in the Padlet board toward the end, and I have answers for those. The first question that you asked was what to do about the PSAEs, because they're such an area of frustration for many students, and they are required. Teachers also have a lot of frustration in administering the PSAE. So just wanted to kind of reinforce, as the teacher, your hands are kind of tied. You have to do your best to balance practice and actual testing, and reassure your students that you as the teacher will be looking at a variety of assessments and just to do their best. But one thing I wanted you to know on the parent side, which you as a teacher can't really advocate for, but parents are allowed to opt their children out of the PSAE. I have opted both of my daughters out that are of test-taking age. You have to have some sort of religious reason, and if you want more information, you can let me know. But pretty much anything that, in our case, I say that it violates our beliefs that children should be assessed all the time at school, and that you're basing their learning off of one week's worth of test scores. And that's our reason, among many. My school district has worked with us very positively, and there are other students that are opting out within our school district as well. But that's my way of getting rid of frustration for my own children. But as teachers, we have to kind of go about that in a different way. So if you have more questions, you can message me. The second question was a really good question because it asked, what are some reading comprehension assessments? When we looked at the running record, we were really looking at the decoding and the fluency rate and also what kind of errors they're making, but the running record doesn't truly get to comprehension unless you pair it with a retelling. The DRA assessment tool that I talked about uses a comprehension rubric, and I know on one of the slides I did show you a rubric for comprehension. Some of the things that they will do during a retelling is they will share with you the characters, the setting, the events, which might include a problem and solution. We also want them to be able to make some reflective decisions. So things like, what was your favorite part? What personal connections do you make? What was the author's purpose for reading this? When you get into the higher levels of the DRA, they also will do some predicting. They'll read 2 pages silently, and then they'll make some predictions before they read out loud to you. So those are all ways to assess using, a retelling during a running record. But when we think of comprehension, if you think back a couple of weeks, comprehension encompasses so many different subsets. We have the skills of visualization. We have the skills of predicting, retelling, sequencing, summarizing, making inferences, looking at characterization. And to truly assess all of those, you would basically, as a teacher, aside from that running record time, you will give them activities, much like the ones we plan in our weekly literature sharing. And if you think to your curriculum alignment and your book list project, if you take a piece of literature that you either read out loud or the students read on their own, and then you give them an activity, you're going to base some of those activities around specific areas of comprehension. You might have them do some predicting. You might have them do a vocabulary sort. You might have them visualize and draw what they see. All of these things that you're planning for your lesson plan. The areas of comprehension and vocabulary would really have assessments attached because the activity itself becomes a product of something that you can assess using teacher observation or through observation adding anecdotal notes or recording information on checklists. Occasionally, the activities that you give them may require some recording, so you may have some sort of worksheet or a sheet for record keeping that the student would record answers. That actual activity in written form would be your assessment that then you could again put data on a checklist or some sort of anecdotal note. So what we find with the specific areas of comprehension is usually our instructional activity will become the data we use for an assessment. So there's not really a true assessment of reading comprehension other than the retelling with some sort of questions attached. If you have more questions in that area, please message them to me, and I'd love to chat with you about those. The last thing I wanted to talk about is our lesson demonstration. It is due now in 1 more week. It is due the week of Thanksgiving, and I want to get you ready for how you're going to share those lessons. You have 2 demonstrations. You may share them as 2 separate lessons and videos, or you may share those as one big lesson sharing. But we have our own specific Wigio sharing group for lesson plans for everyone who's in Education 270 this semester. The link is right there, but if you don't want to type that in, It's also in the news section of your class. And also an email invite went out on Sunday. So you have about 3 different ways to join that group. And the second link there is a how-to video on YouTube. There is the link, but again, that will be in the news area and it's embedded so you can watch it. It shows you how to do the recording, how to share in the recording, and how to attach your recording in your lesson plan in Wigio. I know when we did some attaching in Wigio in the beginning of the semester, it was trickier than we thought. So I did make a how-to video exactly what you should do to do those attachments in Wigio. If you have any questions about anything from week 12 or this recap, please message me and I'd love to answer them. And we're moving into week 13, which is going to be writing, and we'll start that on Monday.